Sometimes things don't change in loud, dramatic ways like people often imagine. There's no bell ringing, no explosive moment, just a very ordinary morning. Light slipping through a familiar window, and time seems to slow down by a single beat. Not because the world stops moving, only because something inside you settles just a little. Taurus doesn't usually notice moments like this right away. But then, in a very real, very human instant while walking down a familiar road, you realize you're thinking more than usual, listening more closely, paying attention to details you once passed by without noticing. It's not exactly waiting, and it's not quite worry either. Just a feeling that's hard to name, as if something is moving closer. Close enough to slow the rhythm of your days. Close enough to let your heart begin to rest. And from that slower rhythm, this story quietly begins to unfold. Not through a major event, just through the sense that time is moving a little more gently than it did before. Some mornings, Taurus wakes up and can't quite explain why there's no rush anymore. Light slips through a familiar window, resting softly against an old wall. The room hasn't changed, but the breathing has. Everything seems to move half a step slower, just enough to notice that something inside has begun to settle. It's not that the world stops moving. It's just that some days, you're the one pushing yourself to run, and today you don't. I've watched many people who carry Taurus energy. They rarely say it out loud. But there are days when they stand on a familiar road, watching the traffic pass, and suddenly realize they don't need to merge into the flow right away. As if their feet slow down on their own. As if something inside whispers, "Stay right here just a little longer." In moments like that, very small things come into focus. Wind moving through the trees along the street, the glow of a traffic light reflecting off pavement still damp with morning dew. A familiar sound they used to ignore. Nothing extraordinary, yet no longer meaningless. Taurus is used to stability. When life runs smoothly, they rarely stop to ask how they actually feel. But when the pace slows, emotion finally has room to speak. Not loudly, not urgently, just a quiet presence, like a small flame burning steadily inside a silent room. Sometimes slowing down feels confusing, because slow doesn't mean weak. And not everyone is comfortable giving themselves permission to move gently. In those moments, Taurus doesn't rush toward answers. They observe. They watch themselves. They notice how they respond to the smallest shifts in everyday life. A cup of coffee cooling on the table. A conversation stretching a few minutes longer than planned. An evening spent sitting under a late-night light. No music playing. No sound needed. I remember hearing one Taurus say they knew they had changed when silence stopped bothering them. Before, silence felt like something to fill. Now, it feels like shelter. Not a place to escape, but a place to breathe. Strange how, inside those quiet spaces, people begin to notice the smallest signals they once overlooked. Not signs of anything dramatic. Just pieces of life that had always been there, waiting to be seen more clearly. Maybe it's the calm that comes when nothing has to move forward right away. Maybe it's a softer way of looking at an old problem. Or maybe it's simply the relief of no longer feeling pushed to become someone other than who you are right now. That slowing doesn't bring promises. It doesn't say something is about to happen. It only creates enough space for Taurus to feel what's happening inside. And sometimes, just noticing that is enough to change the way you keep walking. From this slower rhythm, nothing needs to be clear yet. It only needs to be real, and close enough to listen. From that very fragile distance, another feeling begins to appear. Not clearly, without a name. It doesn't knock. It doesn't interrupt. It's just there, like a late-night lamp left on in a quiet room, not to light anything up, only to keep the space from feeling empty. It's not quite worry. If it were worry, the heart would be beating faster. And it's not anticipation either. If it were that, the mind would already be fixed on a destination. This feeling is different. It hovers like sitting alone for a long time, noticing the clock ticking, without irritation, without impatience. You only realize you're thinking more than usual, and yet, you're not rushing to find an answer. Taurus is used to stability. When everything sits in its proper place, there's a sense of comfort. But when emotion begins to stir very gently, it doesn't show on the surface. There's no obvious change in words or actions. Just brief moments when the eyes linger a little longer on something familiar, or when a passing thought echoes in the mind longer than expected. There are evenings like that. The room stays quiet. Warm light spills across an old wall. No music playing. No sound needed. Just sitting there, feeling the familiar warmth of the chair, and realizing you're remembering things you once believed were already closed chapters. Not to feel regret, only to look back and notice how much you've changed since then. That vague feeling doesn't come with a clear message. It doesn't say something is about to happen. It only asks a very gentle question, just enough to pause the stream of thought. Am I preparing for something? Not preparing through action, but through inner readiness. A kind of readiness that doesn't need plans, doesn't need a schedule. I've seen many Taurus souls move through this space. They still go about their daily lives. They still work, still talk, still keep their familiar rhythm. But somewhere in their gaze, there's an added depth. As if they're listening to a very low frequency, nothing loud, just enough to feel intuitively. Sometimes that feeling arrives in the most ordinary moments. While washing dishes, hands resting in warm water, while driving a familiar road, traffic lights reflecting on the windshield. While waiting for an appointment, and suddenly realizing the waiting no longer feels heavy. Everything continues as usual, yet inside, something has shifted. The strange thing is, this feeling doesn't ask to be explained. The more you try to name it, the quieter it becomes. The more you leave it alone, the clearer it feels. Like a small flame burning steadily, not flaring up, not going out, just enough to keep you warm. And perhaps for Taurus, that warmth matters more than any certainty ever could. Not everyone recognizes this state right away. Some people just feel tired without knowing why. Some feel more inward, but not sad. Some simply want more time alone, without a clear reason. Yet they all share one thing: emotion is no longer still. And within that very gentle stirring, a new inner space opens. A space to wonder without needing answers. A space to feel without explanation. As if something inside is making room even if its shape isn't clear yet. This hard-to-name feeling doesn't push Taurus to change. It simply invites them to stay a little longer with themselves. To stay with the silence. To stay with the slower rhythm. And within that staying, very small things begin to come into focus, just enough to keep listening, without needing to understand right away. And then, within that listening, very small signs begin to appear. Not loudly, not suddenly. They arrive in such simple ways that unless you slow down long enough, they're easy to miss. A conversation that seems ordinary, stretching a few minutes longer than planned. Someone's voice softening for just a brief moment, enough to make your heart pause. There's no clear reason why, yet that one sentence stays with you for the rest of the day. Sometimes it's nothing more than an old message reread while clearing space on your phone. Familiar words, once skimmed without thought, suddenly carry a different tone. Not because the message changed, but because the one reading it did. In moments like this, Taurus doesn't react right away. They let the feeling settle, like waiting for a leaf to finish falling before taking the next step. These signs don't resemble news, in the usual sense. They don't arrive with notifications. There's no headline, no explanation attached, just very small details of everyday life, showing up at just the right moment, enough to gently shift a familiar way of thinking. Like a light breeze passing through a room, not disturbing anything, only causing the curtain to move ever so slightly. There are days when Taurus notices they're thinking more deeply about things once taken for granted. An old question asked again in a different tone. A familiar choice seen from a new angle. Not to deny the past, only to understand why that choice was made, and whether the feeling behind it is still there. I once watched a Taurus pull over just to see a traffic light change colors. Not because they were in a hurry, not because they were tired. Only because that moment carried a quiet clarity, a reminder that some things keep moving forward, even when you do nothing at all. And within that steady motion, the heart grows lighter, as if gently reminded that intervention isn't always required. Small signs tend to arrive when no one is expecting them. While washing your hands under warm water, while sorting through old belongings, while sitting in a quiet room, late night light casting shadows across the floor. They don't ask for a response. They don't demand decisions. They simply appear as if only to be noticed. Taurus has a very particular way of receiving moments like these. No rush to label them. No rush to conclude. The pieces are left where they are, placed gently on the table, then observed from a small distance. Sometimes it takes days, even weeks, for the feeling to connect into a clearer shape. And even when it isn't clear yet, there's no urge to force it. What's interesting is that the more attention Taurus gives to these small details, the more present they become in their own life. Not in a controlling way, but in a listening one. Listening to subtle responses within. Listening to quiet shifts in how an old situation is seen. Listening to the rhythm of life when it no longer pushes. Important news rarely knocks loudly. It usually arrives this way through signs that are small, ordinary, deeply human. Just enough to make you pause for a moment longer. And in that pause, Taurus begins to sense that some things don't need to be announced at all. They only need to be felt slowly, gently, through the passing of very ordinary days. And then, another moment appears as light as the breath you take just after closing a door behind you. An old memory returns, quietly, without warning. It arrives the way a late-night light suddenly reflects off a familiar corner of the wall, making you pause for a few extra seconds just to look. There's no clear reason why that memory chooses this moment. No special sign. You're walking down a familiar road, and a distant afternoon comes back to you. You're washing your hands under warm water, and an old sentence rises to the surface. These memories don't carry sharp emotion. They don't arrive with intensity. They come calmly, as if they only want to be recognized, and then quietly remain. Taurus doesn't usually dig into the past in a self-punishing way. But when memory returns within this slower rhythm of life, it carries a different tone. Not blame. Not regret. Just a chance to look again through eyes that have changed, eyes that know how to wait, how to stay quiet, and perhaps how to be gentler with themselves. Some things once felt very heavy, heavy enough that part of the heart had to close just to keep moving forward. But now, when those moments resurface, they're no longer sharp. They're softer, rounder, like a stone worn smooth by water over time, no longer painful to hold. In moments like these, Taurus realizes they've traveled farther than they once believed. Not through dramatic leaps, but through a steady, quiet persistence. Days of showing up. Days of keeping rhythm. Days of staying with what felt familiar when staying was necessary. And over time, that staying became a foundation solid enough that old memories no longer feel like burdens. I once heard a Taurus say they truly understood a past experience only when they stopped trying to rewrite it in their mind. When "if only I had done things differently" no longer appeared. In its place, a quiet acceptance emerged. This is how it happened, and somehow I learned how to keep living alongside it. No need to name the lesson. No need to draw conclusions. Memory returning during this phase is like a mirror set back in its proper place. It doesn't exaggerate. It doesn't distort. It reflects just enough to show the distance between who you were then and who you are now. And within that distance, there's a very real kind of growth, even if it's never spoken out loud. Some evenings, sitting in a quiet room, late-night light spilling across the floor, Taurus lets thoughts pass through without trying to hold on to them. Memories come and go. Emotions rise and settle. There's no need to understand everything. No pressure to resolve it all. Just permission to stay with what's present. What's worth noticing is this memory doesn't pull Taurus back into the past. Instead, it places them more firmly in the present. Like a small flame burning steadily in a closed space, not flaring up, not fading out just enough to keep things warm. And within that warmth, the world begins to look different. Less judgment, less urgency. Perhaps it's only when old memories return without causing pain that you realize change has truly happened. Not loudly, not for recognition, just the feeling of standing still in the middle of ordinary life, knowing you can be there fully with both the past and the present. From this place, the future doesn't need to be clear yet. It only needs to be calm enough to keep walking at your own pace, and within that stillness, a very subtle movement begins to take place inside. Not a change of direction, but a change in the way things are seen. When the noise of the outside world no longer pulls you forward, Taurus turns back to a familiar inner space that's been left unattended for quite some time. It isn't loud there. There are no bright lights. Just an inner room, wide enough to sit down and look around. Moments like this tend to arrive when no one expects them. An evening after a long day. A desk lamp casting light onto a wooden surface marked by time. No music playing. No need for more light. Just sitting there, letting thoughts pass through without trying to hold on to them. And then, quite naturally, a familiar question appears, not to challenge, but to understand. Taurus looks back at the choices made during difficult seasons. Not to judge what was right or wrong, only to recognize why those choices were made. There were times when silence didn't mean nothing to say, but a need for more time to feel. Times when persistence didn't come from certainty, but from a refusal to abandon what had already begun. This kind of reflection doesn't happen all at once. It's like cleaning a room that hasn't been opened in years. It can't be rushed. It can't be finished in a single moment. Each time you touch a small corner, something long forgotten appears: an old decision, an unnamed feeling, a desire once set aside in favor of stability. What's interesting is that in looking back, Taurus doesn't feel weaker. Instead, they begin to recognize the quiet strength of endurance. Not loud, nothing to prove. Just the ability to stay with something long enough for it to become part of who they are. Like a small flame burning steadily in a closed room, no need to flare, yet warm enough to last through a long night. Some afternoons, as sunlight slants through the window, Taurus notices a shift in how they treat themselves. Less harsh, less demanding, no longer insisting on understanding everything right away. In its place, a gentler patience emerges. Permission to not know yet. Permission to take more time. Permission to let the pieces rest until they find their place on their own. During this quiet rearranging, some things are set down. Not because they were wrong, but because they've completed their purpose. Old expectations that no longer fit. Standards that once provided stability, but now feel heavy. And there are also values that remain untouched, not out of habit, but because they truly reflect who you are. This kind of self-reflection doesn't lead to a grand conclusion. It doesn't carry promises. It simply makes the next step feel lighter. Like a room that's been cleared not to display, but to breathe more easily. The inner space feels more open, even if a few corners remain unexplored. Perhaps this is the moment when Taurus senses a very subtle shift. Not a change in circumstance, not a change in path, but a change in the relationship with the self. Less resistance, less urgency, and a growing willingness to stay with what's unfolding, even when it hasn't found a name yet. From here, nothing needs to change right away. The inner rearranging can continue slowly, with intention. Like a foundation being gently adjusted, steady enough to receive whatever comes next, in a way that's deeply personal, deeply human, and unmistakably real. And from that foundation, another feeling begins to take shape. Waiting doesn't disappear, it changes its form. Before, waiting felt like standing in the rain, looking up, searching for a sign of clear skies. Now waiting feels more like sitting by a slightly open window, listening to the rain fall, without needing to guess when it will stop. There's no tension anymore. No need to grip time tightly in your hands. Taurus once lived by counting days, counting effort, counting even the quiet sacrifices. When nothing felt certain, waiting easily turned into a burden like a bag carried on the shoulder, not heavy at first, but tiring the longer you walked. Then, after many pauses and quiet inner rearrangements, that bag is set down. Not thrown away. Just placed beside you close enough not to forget, far enough not to weigh you down. Some afternoons pass without anything remarkable happening. Sunlight slowly pulls back from the sidewalk. The sound of traffic fades. Taurus notices they check the clock less often now. Not from indifference, but from releasing the urge to force time into giving an answer right away. A gentle openness begins to appear not toward a specific outcome, but toward the possibility that what needs to be known will eventually be spoken in the right way, at a moment when you're ready to hear it. Here's the difference: waiting no longer means standing still. It becomes a kind of slow movement. You still go to work. You still take care of small responsibilities. You still keep your familiar rhythm. But within each step, there's more room to breathe. Like walking a long road at a steady pace, no need to rush, no need to stop for too long either. I once watched a Taurus sit beside a stove for a long while, just letting a small flame burn evenly. Nothing cooking, just watching the fire, listening to its soft crackle. In that moment, waiting no longer looked like longing. It felt more like quiet trust that some things need time, and time isn't an enemy. When waiting becomes lighter, the heart follows. The questions don't disappear, but they stop pushing. They step aside, making room for the present moment. A warm glass held in your hands. The familiar scent of wood in the room. A late night lamp, bright enough to read a few lines, then turned off. These small details become anchors, keeping waiting from drifting into anxiety. What's interesting is that within this openness, Taurus begins to notice another kind of strength. Not the strength to endure, but the strength to not force. If something hasn't been said yet, perhaps it needs more space. If an answer hasn't arrived, perhaps the question is still resting in the right place. And if everything remains unclear, then uncertainty, too, has the right to exist like morning mist not yet lifted, not blocking the path, only softening the view. Waiting now becomes an act of care. Caring for yourself while not knowing. Caring for your rhythm so it doesn't break. Caring for what's already here, instead of only looking toward what hasn't arrived. Like setting a small table, each day not overcrowded, not empty. And if one day, what needs to be known still hasn't revealed itself, Taurus no longer feels lost the way they once did. A quiet steadiness has taken root. Enough to keep moving. Enough to stay with the present. Enough to wait without feeling abandoned. Waiting, in this way, is no longer a delay. It becomes a different rhythm, slow, steady, and kind, giving everything the time it needs to find its rightful place. And then, within the time that's been gently returned, quiet begins to take on a different meaning. No longer a space that needs to be filled, but a kind of answer that doesn't use words. There are evenings that feel completely ordinary. A quiet room. Soft light resting on a familiar wall. Nothing happens in the outward sense. Yet inside, something slowly becomes clearer, the way shapes begin to appear once your eyes adjust to the dark. Taurus stays with that quiet longer than before. Not searching for a message. Just being there, listening as the breath settles into a steady rhythm again. The questions that once circled the mind don't disappear, but they stop pushing. They step back, making room for a sense of presence that you are here, in this moment, and that, somehow, is enough. Sometimes clarity arrives very softly. Not as now I understand everything, but as I'm not tangled anymore. Like a familiar road after the rain, still wet, but no longer slippery. Like a small flame burning evenly in the kitchen, no need to turn up the heat. This quiet doesn't offer instructions, yet it eases the feeling of being lost that once felt so sharp. I once watched a Taurus sit by a slightly open window, streetlight reflecting on the glass. No heavy thinking, no analysis, just letting the light come in and move away again. In that moment, something was accepted. Not every answer needs a form. Some things only need to feel right in the heartbeat, right in the breath, right in the calm that's already here. Quiet, in this way, becomes a companion. It doesn't tell you what to do. It simply reminds you that you don't have to do much. When the mind grows less restless, choices lose their sharp edges. There's no rush to decide, no pressure to name everything. As if a new inner order has formed, quiet, but steady. Some nights, Taurus notices they no longer sift through memories searching for answers. The past is there, but it doesn't demand attention. The future waits ahead, but it doesn't call out. The present becomes complete in the simplest ways: a warm cup of tea, the sound of a neighbor closing a door, a wall clock moving at its own slow pace. These details don't say anything grand, yet they keep the heart grounded. What matters is this: within this quiet, a new kind of courage appears. Not the courage to rush forward, but the courage to not hurry. The courage to allow not knowing. The courage to trust that uncertainty isn't failure. It's simply a phase unfolding the way it's meant to. For Taurus, this is a very subtle shift from control to trust. When quiet becomes the answer, important news no longer needs to knock. It may have been there all along, in the lighter feeling in the chest, in deeper sleep, in waking up without urgency. No announcement, no exclamation point, just a quiet understanding that the rhythm feels right. And even without knowing what's coming, Taurus no longer feels out of place. Quiet has done its work, gathering scattered pieces, softening sharp corners, placing you somewhere steady enough to keep listening. Listening not to predict, but to recognize when it's time. Within that quiet space, each passing day is no longer waiting. It's a very small step, steady, honest, real enough for the story to continue at its own pace, without needing to understand right away, only needing to stay. And when Taurus stays with themselves long enough, something very simple begins to surface. You don't always need to know where everything is heading. There are seasons in life when keeping the heart soft is already a meaningful choice. Soft enough not to hurt yourself with questions that don't have answers yet. Soft enough to let each day pass without demanding it carry some grand meaning. This openness isn't about believing right away in something you haven't seen. It's more like leaving a door slightly open, just enough for light to come in, without needing to step outside. Within that opening, Taurus keeps their familiar steadiness. There's simply more room to breathe now, room to feel, room to observe, room to let things arrive in their own way. Some evenings, when late night light softens the whole room, you suddenly realize you've stopped forcing yourself to understand everything. Thoughts come and go, like distant traffic fading down the street. No holding on, no pushing away, just letting them pass, and staying with the very real sense of being present in that moment. In that presence, a gentle question may arise, not to be answered, only to be asked. What has been making me feel more at ease lately? Nothing new. Nothing dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as sitting a little longer by the window, listening to someone without rushing to respond, or allowing yourself to slow down without feeling guilty for it. This story isn't here to say that something will definitely happen. It only whispers that sometimes the feeling that something may be drawing closer is enough for life to quietly recalibrate itself, enough to become more aware in small choices, enough to be gentler with yourself and with the unnamed spaces that still feel uncertain. And if one day that important news arrives in a very ordinary way, through a sentence spoken, a moment of quiet understanding, or simply the lightness of waking up, Taurus doesn't need to rush to grab it. There's room to receive it slowly, the way this whole journey has taught. And if things still aren't clear, that's okay too. Some things don't need to be believed quickly to matter. They only ask for a willingness to listen, and the patience to stay with the rhythm that's already unfolding. And perhaps, within that very human stillness, each person will begin to sense what's quietly becoming more important to them in their own way, very gently, and something that remains, even after the story has come to a close.